Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Local News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us early here this Friday morning as we have a special pop-up guest. We have Colin Reed, a GOP strategist with Definers, the public affairs firm down in D.C., and former Scott Brown top aide and campaign manager. Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kate, thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it because it's been a busy week and you've been tapped quite a few times to give your perspective. The latest that we've seen from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who you know quite well from your days with Scott Brown, having put on her Texas bar card the status of American Indian. Now, we know that she had done the DNA testing showing a minuscule amount of Native American blood in her heritage. But this is nothing new for you, but let's go way back for when the first Elizabeth Warren American Indian claims were made.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say out of the gate is it's a mistake to underestimate Elizabeth Warren. And although she's had a rough week and she's about to embark on her official announcement tomorrow, I think it's a mistake to write her off totally. That being said, this was not a good development for her in any sense of the word. Elizabeth Warren, since this controversy broke 7 years ago, has never really had a satisfying answer to it. I think a lot of the analogies that political commentators draw are not always accurate, but in some sense, I do think there's a fair correlation between Hillary Clinton's email scandal and Elizabeth Warren's Native American issue, because there's just never been a satisfying answer. Okay. The story always changed, the facts never come out, and that's why it lingers on and on and on.
And I know this week she had mentioned, because a lot of folks were talking about it, you know, in her younger days, there obviously was not as much of an Ancestry.com. And she kind of threw the family under the bus a little bit, basically saying it was what she was told. Let's go back to, you know, sort of the rationale for these claims. And as you said, have we just heard so many different reasons?
Yeah, that's part of it. And the other issue is that Elizabeth Warren, to me, has never been about her ancestry or her heritage. That's just kind of that's where President Trump takes it with his name calling. To me, it's always been about Elizabeth Warren's character. And this whole issue reveals a side of her as to whether or not she was willing to use her ancestry that she might or might not have been entitled to get a professional advantage. Now, she says no. She said it every single time that she hasn't. But the fact remains is, depending on what job she was applying for, her race changed. And that's led to allegations and suspicions that she was doing it to try and further her professional career, notably, especially when she started applying to Ivy League schools. And to me, that's the bigger issue. It's whether or not she was willing to take advantage of a program she wasn't entitled to get a professional advantage. And that's less about her heritage and more about her character.
And how much does this linger, Colin, for the senator, as you said, looking to make that official announcement shortly, as we're full swing looking at 2020 now? Let's talk Democratic debates, for instance. I mean, how many times can this issue keep getting brought up? And before we talk to Virginia and the issue that some elected officials have there, I mean, how much does this continue to cloud her candidacy? And is there any potential to move beyond it?
Well, that's a great point, Kate, because the interesting thing about this is none of her Democratic opponents have weaponized this issue in any sense of the word. Senator Kamala Harris was asked about it yesterday and took a pass at it. Right now, it's just becoming from her critics on the right, and now the mainstream media and the former Washington Post and the Boston Globe, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when this issue will really when gas will really pour in the flames is when someone decides to bring this up in a debate and say to her, Senator, you took advantage of an affirmative action program that you shouldn't have, and you denied it to a person who should have got it. And that's wrong. And that is when I think that the rubber will really meet the road. I think it's something that Elizabeth Warren must know in the back of her head. But the other point is, if you were attracted to Elizabeth Warren's message, her attacks on free enterprise, all her bashing of businesses and banks, you have 30 other candidates to choose from with the same message, minus all the baggage. Elizabeth Warren, had she run last time, it would have been her and Hillary Clinton. And I think that is the real problem that Elizabeth Warren faces, is her window is closed. She should have run last time. She would have had a wide open left lane, and now she's sharing it with dozens of other candidates without all the scandals.
And let's talk a little bit about that field that's shaping up for 2020 on the Democratic side. And as you mentioned, sharing that left lane has a few centrist tendencies, but I think folks do tend to keep her fairly left. Do you foresee a more leftist candidate emerging? Again, it's super early. I know it's only February 19, but just the number of candidates who have expressed interest and are tossing their hats in. When we talked with Jennifer Lawless at UVA, she said, who isn't running? So what does it mean for the party, as you see it from your Republican vantage point, for the Democrats twofold? A, to have so many candidates expressing interest, and B, a proliferation of perhaps left-leaning ones.
Well, the party has moved so far to the left, Kate, that candidates like Howard Schultz, who's a lifelong Democrat, a very progressive guy by all accounts, no longer feels as though he has the ability to run. He's got to run as an independent. And I think that speaks to where the party's going. I think in many ways the primary that we're about to watch on the Democratic side will be a carbon copy of what happened in the 2012 and 2016 Republican primaries, when these base voters were so angry at President Obama and they were demanding that their alternative pass all these litmus tests, move further and further to the right, and then it becomes a challenge in the general election. I would argue what's happening now, based on their dislike of President Trump, the Democrats are demanding this party go even further to the left. And it's going to be a royal rumble to see who gets to the furthest point out there. And then they're going to have to come back and try and appeal to voters who may not be so extreme in a general election. So it is going to be a race to the left. I think you saw that with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, what she did yesterday with her Green New Deal. And there's Green New Deal or Medicare for all or abolishing ICE. You're going to see issue after issue after issue like that where there's a purity test. And the purity test is coming back to haunt Democrats now in Virginia because they have some of their own candidates who have fallen short of the bar that they set for their own when it comes to issues of race and Me Too issues. And now that's put the Democrats in a real quandary in that state.
Do you foresee Howard Schultz making it through to the general? I mean, of course, as an independent, I mean staying in. It's
hard to see how he creates a viable path for himself based on the way our system is constructed, the Electoral College, et cetera. That being said, I think he's pretty appalled by how far his party has moved to the left. He's obviously not a fan of President Trump, so maybe he's trying to see if there's a lane up the middle for him. These folks from the business world, they tend to evaluate things different than politicians, and I think if he doesn't see a path for him to justify spending all his money and time, then he probably won't do it. But it speaks to where the party's at, that he can't run as a Democrat, that he's got to run as an independent. And by the way, he spent his whole first couple weeks criticizing not President Trump, but members of his own party. He was blasting them on issues like Medicare for all and the Green New Deal and Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax. So it seems as though his fights right now were the left, not the right.
Well, we did see here in Rhode Island, following that 60 Minutes interview, let's not forget the fact that he just released a new book.
Right.
But we did hear from Congressman David Cicilline here, immediately took to Twitter and said, Howard, like your coffee, but don't do it. I mean, saw that visceral reaction, that partisanship that he had expressed was one of the reasons that he's running.
Well, New England is Dunkin' Donuts country, as you know, so, I mean, that's going to be an issue for him. And I would love to see Howard Schultz talking about how great Starbucks is in front of a room full of grizzled New Hampshire folks who are dunking through to the core. So that would be one issue that comes to mind, especially up there.
Let's talk a little bit about what's been in the news, dominating the news, if you will, if it wasn't State of the Union this week, is what's happening both in Virginia and nationally with the issue of blackface. We did just see in Florida, the Republican Secretary of State immediately resign when a photo emerged. And now with Virginia, between the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, a myriad of issues facing them all, but 2 out of 3 facing blackface issues and 1 facing sexual assault allegations. And as I mentioned, we discussed earlier, is Virginia really ground zero for political intrigue right now? When does this die down?
Well, like everything else right now, Kate, it's clouded in politics, not only at the state level, at Virginia, where all 3 of the people currently enshrouded in controversy, if they were to resign, would essentially hand the state over to a Republican, which is not something that the Democrats are eager to do, obviously. But then I would also take it a step further than that and point out that Virginia has trended blue in recent years. The Democrats at a presidential level have begin to count it comfortably in their column for electoral colleges. They built their path to 270. Remember, it was Republican for years and years and years. President Obama won it in 2008, and then since then it hasn't really been competitive at the presidential level. So you got to know that that's playing out in their mind about whether or not they can count on this as they try and dethrone President Trump from the presidency. But I think that what's going to happen is these 2020 candidates who are, jostling to get an advantage with each other, one of them is going to figure out how to take it a step further than where they're currently at in terms of demanding purity on this issue. And then when they do it, it's going to be hard for the dominoes not to fall. So that immense pressure, everything that happens right now in this city plays out under the shadow of the 2020 race, because these candidates out in the early states, followed around by a pack of reporters, they get asked for their reaction, and then every other candidate has to react to it. So we're in full-out political season, so it's going to be really fascinating to watch. But, I guess the one silver lining for Elizabeth Warren this week was her revelation came amidst the Virginia meltdown and the State of the Union, and yet you and I are still talking about it on Friday morning, so I think it speaks to the magnitude of that story, too.
Definitely has some legs. So sitting there as a GOP strategist, do I assume that you would like to see probably a more left-leaning candidate come out to be that juxtaposition versus this current administration?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you saw President Trump at the State of the Union. I mean, State of the Union speeches are quickly forgotten. But the one lasting takeaway that I think was his framing of socialism. And I think what President Trump showed that for all the challenges his presidency has had, he is still capable of making this 2020 election choice and not a referendum. And it's a choice between two candidates. He will define those battle lines very clearly and offer the electorate a choice between two very distinct visions for America, like he did with Hillary Clinton. He won in large part because he was able to disqualify Hillary Clinton, and he had a lot of help with that because of her problems. But he'll be able to do the same with his 2020 ultimate opponent and be able to frame up the economic vision that they were pushing, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, frankly. She's really the heart and soul of this party in terms of what they want to do. So that, I think, will be the lasting impact, and I think that he'll be able to frame it up nicely. When it's a referendum on President Trump, we saw that last year in the midterms. Not good for the Republicans. But when it's a choice between two candidates, he's got a better shot.
Well, Colin Reed with Definers, I so appreciate your taking the time to, again, Skype in, especially with the Scott Brown perspective. Have you talked with your former boss at all?
Yeah, I saw him a few weeks ago. He was here in town. We caught up over dinner. It's always good to see him. He's living a good life in New Zealand, and I told him he's in a better place than being here in D.C., frankly, and I think he's beginning to realize that too.
Well, Colin Reed, again, down inside the Beltway, thank you for taking the time to Skype in, giving us your GOP consultant perspective on the latest in politics, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Kate.
Okay, thanks, Colin. We're going to let Colin Reed go. We'll be back here at noontime in the Navigant Credit Union broadcast.